For those of you I haven't had the pleasure to meet before, my name is Sai Mender. I'm one of the senior solutions engineers here on Zenhub's team. And today we will be talking about building sprints with realistic goals. I think every single one of us has at one point over the course of our career come to the end of a sprint and figured out that, oh, it turns out not all of the work managed to get done during the time box that we set for it. I'm going to go ahead and post a quick poll, and feel free to chime in and let us know what percentage of you have gone ahead and finished all the tasks within the sprint that you set for yourself, how many of you have never finished the tasks, and how many of you occasionally finish the tasks that you set for yourself. Okay, I can see there's a little bit of a split. It seems like some of you never finish all the tasks. Some of you sometimes finish all the tasks that you've set for yourself, but overwhelmingly, it seems none of you can say that you always finish the tasks within the sprint that you've set for yourself. Here at Zenhub, we have been working really hard to try to come up with a system that would help you guys identify how much work that you can complete over any given time period, and try to cut down on those instances when you cannot finish all the tasks that you've set for yourself. And so how do we go about doing this? We do this by figuring out what the baseline is for our team, right? Figuring out how much work we can complete during any given time period, and then go ahead and use our planning poker estimation tool right within Zenhub to get to the best possible estimate we can for each one of the individual tasks that we would like to complete. We take that information and run it through Zenhub's velocity report to figure out what our historical trends have looked like with regard to the sprints that we've completed. And then finally, take advantage of Zenhub's automation to make the process as hands-off as possible, right? Taking that data-driven advantage and making it entirely hands-off. What does this look like, within Zenhub itself? What we're ideally working towards is what we call within Zenhub our average velocity. So after your team completes your first 3 initial sprints, Zenhub will start calculating your average velocity, meaning sprint over sprint, how much work can your team realistically complete? Now, there's a couple different moving parts here, including how your team does that estimation. What we found with the teams that use Zenhub is the best way to do that estimation is, in fact, to go ahead and use planning poker. For those of you that aren't intimately familiar with how to do that, we can do it by opening up any one of our specific GitHub issues, going down on the right-hand side panel until we see the planning poker button, and click on Add Members to a Vote. From here, we have the ability to select any one of our individual team members who we think would have any sort of insight into this individual ticket. Usually, we would select someone that's worked on this type of ticket historically, someone who probably is within the context of the same team this work is being done on. We can go ahead and select as many or as few of them as we would like. So here I have invited Chasen, my colleague Naoko, Andrew, etc., to come in and vote on this ticket. The reason why this is so important is because having large numbers of individuals estimate how long or how challenging it's going to be to complete a ticket tend to be much more accurate than just having one individual do so, whether they're the individual the ticket has been assigned to or the individual that's actually writing up that ticket themselves. From here, if everyone agrees on what story point will be assigned to that specific ticket, it'll go ahead and appear instantaneously. If not, then that gives us the opportunity during a planning or an estimation session to go ahead and adjust them, have those further conversations as we see fit. The reason this portion is so important before we even get to the velocity tracking and looking at the historical metrics of our team is that we can figure out whether or not those estimates are accurate. Now, if, for example, as we can see here, we've assigned 132 story points to this sprint, 215 story points to this sprint, but have only completed 132 of them, it begs the question whether that is actually an accurate reflection of the amount of work that we have to complete, whether some of those tickets are too large, are estimated too large, or estimated too small. Are there any adjustments we could make from that perspective? By having everyone estimate on them, we have the most accurate number we possibly can moving forward. And it makes it super convenient to use our My Work or our daily stand-up features to figure out who needs to estimate those tickets as we get started for our day ahead. From there, once we come into our team velocity report, we have that blue line indicating what our average velocity is over time, as well as that green line indicating what our rolling velocity is. For those most recent sprint, in this case, last 7 sprints, it will indicate that here we have about 86 story points, meaning historically there might have been some sprints where we've underperformed, where our team can be on a regular cadence, and that's skewing the overall average lower, but we do have the capacity to go as high as 86. There is no set number of story points that a team can't necessarily complete. Of course, this is all relative. It depends on the type of work you're working on, the type of the way the work is assigned. There's a ton of different externalities that might affect how much work your team can complete. But being aware that we live in between these two data points is incredibly important. So now that we've figured out that we can complete between 42 story points on and 86 story points on any given sprint, we can go ahead and we can actually open up our sprint planning module. We'll do that by navigating back to our work tracker, navigating to the top right of the screen, clicking on that create button, and finally coming down to modify recurring sprints. Now, assuming that we have a little bit of data within our velocity report, there's probably no need to go back and reset the cadence within which our team works. And so most of our focus will be surrounding the 2 pieces of automation that we're looking at here. That first top piece of automation helps us out by moving any unfinished tickets within our current sprint automatically to our next sprint at the end of a sprint. Reflecting back on that poll that we were all just looking at, it does seem like most of us have run into that instance before where we have work that hasn't necessarily been completed. But if we're working with any sort of intentionality, it's probably necessary that individual task, that individual piece of work get completed. And so by toggling that on, we can ensure that we never have to manually go back through a specific sprint, figure out what hasn't been done, and then reset it to our next sprint. We can automatically have that done for us, ensuring that any piece of work that we add to any sprint will get done eventually one way or another. But the real genius is that second piece of automation, where we automatically build sprints from your backlog. Now, here, we can configure our pipelines to a set concept. I know that not all of you use our out-of-the-box named pipelines. You might have slightly different nomenclature regarding those pipelines, those swim lanes. But as soon as we've paired them off to a specific concept, we can go ahead and hit save. And here we can indicate the number of story points we want our team to complete. So now if we go back to that velocity chart, and we can see that our team average is 42, but our rolling velocity is indicating about 86. We can go ahead and aim for somewhere in the middle. So let's say we want to complete 55 story points over the next sprint. We can go ahead, type in that number of story points, hit save. And what will happen is the pipeline that we've indicated as our backlog pipeline, in this case, product backlog, will serve as the feeder pipeline for our sprint backlog. So every sprint, or at the beginning of every sprint, the Zenhub system will automatically go in here and then pick from the very top of that pipeline until we have 55 story points worth of work to add to our upcoming sprint. Now, what we're doing is we are taking a data-driven approach based on the historical performance of our team and fleshing out those future sprints with them to ensure that, we're not necessarily overcommitting to a sprint. We can give a realistic idea of the amount of work we can complete on a regular cadence to other teams within our organization, our leadership, external stakeholders, or customers that just might be curious as to when a new feature, for example, might be available to them. At this point, I'm going to take a little bit of a beat and allow any of you to ask any questions that you might have. Please feel free to drop something in the Q&A pipeline, or to raise your hand if you have any questions. None so far? Awesome. So there are a few exceptions, and there's some common questions that do tend to crop up during this process. One of the most common ones being those teams that aren't terribly agile, that don't necessarily like estimating their individual tickets. What do they do? How can they take advantage of this exact same process? That solution is quite simple. Whereas those teams that do estimate their tickets can come in, use a Fibonacci sequence, whatever sort of cadence of numbers they like to use in order to estimate those issues. Those teams that aren't doing that can go ahead and just assign a value of 1 to each one of their individual tickets. That will still be reflected within the velocity report, and it will just indicate the number of tickets that you're closing out sprint over sprint. While it is not perfect, not all tickets are, of course, created equal. Some are much more challenging than others. Over time, it does tend to average out. And in that instance, I would probably recommend that we go ahead and we use the average velocity as opposed to the rolling velocity, because we don't have that degree of specificity. We are just looking at overall the number of tasks that we can complete in any given instance. The other question that comes up and crops up quite a bit as we're working with our users is, what happens if at the 11th hour we have to wedge in a ticket? We need to put out a hotfix for a bug that just came in. Something in the system is down. It's something that immediately has to be addressed, but might have a knock-on effect with regard to the rest of our upcoming sprint. And the answer to that is also, once again, to revert to that velocity report. By opening up the velocity report, but then by grouping that column by labels, we can then narrow down specifically what percent of that work has, for example, been assigned to bug. Those last minute fixes that have to go right out the door. And inevitably, what we can do is we can add buffer to our upcoming sprints. So in this case, let's say about 5 story points on average are being assigned. 11 there, about 8 there. So let's say about 7 story points, sprint over sprint, are being assigned to each one of these specific sprints. And let's say that we decided 55 story points are what we can reasonably conclude over the course of a sprint. We would go ahead and subtract that. And so while we are within that planning modal for the sprint, instead of the 55, we can go ahead and give it a value at 48, knowing that inevitably over the course, in this case, of the next 2 weeks, a few bugs will pop up that require us to, address them immediately. So this way we can leave additional room based on the historical capacity of our team for stuff that does tend to crop up on a day-to-day basis, as well as do some sort of planning with regard to the more regular types of work that we're expecting to execute on over the course of the current sprint. We only booked about 30 minutes for this webinar. I know you're all terribly busy. I wanted to give you all some time back, open up the floor for any general questions and Q&A you guys might have, not just with regards to sprints, but also any general questions that might be tangentially related. Are there any specific queries, questions, concerns, conundrums that I can maybe address? I will go ahead and take a look here. No, it doesn't seem like anyone has raised their hands, and it doesn't seem like the Q&A has been filled out. In that case, I think we've managed to get this done fairly quickly. I'm just going to give it one more quick go around. Make sure anyone that does have any questions, concerns, maybe address a few more of those common questions that teams tend to have. Awesome. Another great thing to use the velocity chart with, though, when we're talking about building out those sprints, those upcoming sprints, those current sprints, is to not only be able to slice and dice the work that has been completed sprint over sprint with regard to individual labels and epics themselves, but we can also do that with regard to assignees. Right. Let's say we have a bunch of work that is dependent on one of our backend engineers being in seat over the course of the upcoming 2 weeks, but we are well aware that that individual is on leave, let's say. Let's say they have PTO, they're going on vacation. We can go ahead and we can use that historical data to figure out the trends that we're seeing, and remove that excess those excess story points from the regular cadence that we have set up. So let's say, for example, again, it's 55. One of our backend engineers completes about 10 story points. So we're back down to 45. And then again, we want to remove the 7 to leave as a buffer for bugs that might be upcoming at any given point. We can do that math. Go ahead, set it as a piece of automation, and then wait for it to self-populate from the board itself. So the only sort of work that our team is doing is on a regular basis is as those tickets are being created by technical leads, product owners of various stripes, inevitably, each one of the team members is getting the ability to look through their daily work, estimate it on their own free time. Right? There's no need to necessarily hop onto an estimation meeting. That can all be broken up, and people can estimate as they see fit. And finally, those individual sprints being built out and being able to be sent off.
Can you hear me?
I can.
Perfect. All right. Is there any way on the sprints, like I have my sprint set up, but is there any way that like if one is either longer or shorter than the others that you can edit the dates? Like if there's, say we had, multiple 2 week sprints and then we wanted to do like a 1 week sprint for like discovery or education purposes, that kind of stuff. But we want to assign tickets to individuals because they're going to be performing discovery session or educational on specific things that we want them to do. Is there any way to like change like a specific sprint's date? Like on your screen here, you've got like, let's see, let's just do the March 11th through the 25th. Like if you wanted to turn that into a 1 week sprint, is there any way to do that?
100%. We could come right in, and then you said March 11th to the 25th.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead and then make that change. That change can happen at any given moment. So once again, go up to create, modify recurring sprints, click on the drop down, click on change sprint schedule, and then go
Oh,
ahead and make that change.
okay. Okay. So if you wanted to specifically change that March, like the third one down.
Yeah.
Oh, I see. It's got it. Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
exactly. So we would have to revert it back after we've made the change. Once we tie in or lock in a cadence, a 2 week or 3 week cadence, it does tend to repeat. We
Hmm.
don't have the ability to just change that one.
Okay. So we would change that and then change the next sprint schedule. That way
Exactly.
it picks back up again. Okay, great.
Exactly. Revert back once it's been completed.
Okay, thank you.
Of course, anytime. I see another question from Phil Gibbs. Phil, when building a new sprint using the new velocity, how does priority of issues play a role? Or maybe I don't understand how the filter works. Great question. I am going to go ahead and allow you to talk. Do you mind fleshing that out just a bit more for me, Phil? I think you should have the ability to speak at this point.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yep, I think we can kind of pick up on what you're saying now.
I had to push a few buttons to get access here. Yeah, so I'm just having a look at building the new sprints from the backlog,
Yes.
and I probably need to go through the recording again to make sure I totally understand. But if you're building it from the backlog and you've already got issues planned for your new sprint, and now you're using velocity to change what you're capable of doing, how does it dump out issues that you know you're not going to be able to? In other words, how does the filter work taking into account priority? Because my assumption, and that's why I say I'm not sure if I understand how the filter works. Maybe if you want to limit your sprint backlog, you've obviously got to contain it within the story points that you're setting it to. So what about a whole lot of issues that have priority? It's kind of like a circular question because you're trying to contain yourself into an achievable 2 weeks, for example.
Correct.
What happens if that sprint backlog is already containing a number of high priority items you know you can't do anyway? So it's kind of like I'm almost answering the question as I ask it, but
Exactly.
I don't know how you deal with priority items.
That's a great question. It's actually something we come up with, or we come up against quite a bit. And I think once again, it goes back to that idea that the amount of story points that your team can complete is not necessarily fixed, right? Every single one of us will be called upon during the course of the sprint to maybe go above and beyond the standards that we're usually used to setting for ourselves. The question there, I think, is more of an internal one that's done on a team by team basis, right?
Yeah.
If you
Okay.
have 70 story points worth of tickets and every single one of them is a tier 1 priority, then at that point you kind of just have to complete 70 story points worth of ticket or figure out if there's a way to winnow them down. But there's no way to use the automation to kind of set that prioritization for you. If we're talking about this purely from a technical perspective, how does Zenhub work with that regard? Let's say, for example, you have 50 story points total you're trying to complete. You already have 20 that you've assigned to the upcoming sprint, and that automation kicks in. It will pull an additional 30 from the very top of the product backlog pipeline until it goes down to the very bottom. It'll start at the top and continue to go down to the bottom until it's populated 30 story points worth of work. And at that point, we'll move forward. But yes, that is a challenge, and it's one of the ones that we rely on. Those engineering leaders, those product leaders to kind of lean on their expertise and make that executive decision.
Okay, great. So it's from the product backlog, it's top to bottom.
Correct.
If your sprint backlog is already sitting with a number of story points over the maximum that you've set, and there are no priority items in that sprint backlog, is it also top to bottom filter that will get rid of the ones that are just, where does it start?
That is a very good question. I think it's important to realize that there is a little bit of a distinction between the sprint backlog pipeline and adding tickets to a sprint themselves. So within the context of the sprint backlog, we do have the ability to come in and set an additional piece of automation where we create a trigger where when an issue enters that pipeline, we add it to a current existing sprint. So we can set up that automation, but that automation is separate from adding tickets to a sprint. So yes, tickets that we're actively working on do live in the backlog, but it's not necessarily true that all tickets in the sprint backlog are part of the current sprint. If we've set up all our automation correctly, though, they will all be part of the sprint backlog pipeline. If a ticket has not moved on from the sprint backlog pipeline, and we have set up all our automation correctly, what this means is that those tickets have not been completed. What will happen then is by turning on that initial sprint toggle, because it falls under the bucket of unfinished tickets, it will automatically get added to the upcoming sprint.
Okay. Okay.
I hope that answers your question. I did use the word
Yeah,
sprint
yeah.
a bit, so
I'm looking at the time, and maybe hopefully there are no other questions, but maybe I'll just steal another 30 seconds by just saying, okay, I agree that the sprint backlog doesn't necessarily represent your entire next sprint.
yes.
For your next sprint, though, when you're setting up your new sprint from the backlog,
Yes.
am I understanding how the filter works then? If your current story point count is 100 and you've
Yes.
set it to 50, how does it dump
Yes.
the other 50 from the sprint? What are the metrics that it uses to dump the other 50?
What do you mean by dump the other 50? I'm not sure I
Well,
understand.
because your sprint, you set your sprint capability to 50 story points for the
Yes.
next sprint, right? But
Yes.
but um, but initially you'd already set up. So you're saying that filter is build your new sprints from the backlog. So
Yes.
maybe again, I'm answering my own question. If what's already in the sprint is already over and above what you know you can achieve, that is a manual process. But to pull things in from the backlog, that's literally starting from the top and working its way down to the bottom.
I see what you're saying. It's not going to pull anything additional if you're already over the capacity that you've
Right.
set.
Yeah. Yeah.
So if you already have 70 story points, because God forbid, maybe you've fallen behind sprint over sprint, it's not going to pull any additional tickets in so that you're at, let's say, 120 or a 130.
Yeah. 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 Right.
That is a hard limitation.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Great. No, very useful. Thanks for this. It was really informative.
Of course,
Appreciate your time.
I always enjoy having the opportunity to showcase some of our latest and greatest features. We will be doing this every 2 weeks for the foreseeable future. So I'm looking forward to seeing the rest of you in those upcoming webinars. I know we have come up on time, and you guys all have very busy schedules. I wanted to say thanks again for making it, and I hope to see you guys soon.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye.